Personally, I've been involved with employee motivation and incentive plan design for about 30 years. I've designed incentive plans from baggers in a supermarket to investment bankers in some of the largest banks in America. In the last 8 years, I've focused on small business and writing incentive plans from truck drivers to salespeople. A lot of demand for salespeople incentives. Incentive plan is just one arrow in a quiver of tools to motivate people. And there's a big difference I have found in working with small business owners. It's very different than corporations or government. Business owners are self-motivated. They don't need a special incentive plan. Their business is their incentive plan, and often as business owners, we forget that people aren't self-motivated, that they need something to drive and focus their behavior. Employee motivation is a very complex and difficult area of practice. Different people are motivated by different things at different times. But the studies, you can go to the classic academia of Hertzberg and Maslow, and you'll see that once people feel like that they are physiologically safe, they're going to eat, they're going to live indoors, that they have a group of people around them who support them, only then do incentive plans work. This is a big eye-opener for me when I started looking at this, because when I sat down with managers in the corporate world or business owners in this world, the first thing they want to do is get people to do things and let's put a commission plan in place. There's some real critical failures if the first three steps on this pyramid, this one, basic needs, safety, and belonging, if these three needs are not met, then the incentive plan will not work. So you have to be sure that they understand that, like I said, they're going to live indoors, they're going to be able to feed their family, and they're going to have some sense that I need to be here. Without those core hygiene factors, as Hertzberg put in place, without those things being satisfied, the ego status, am I valuable stage that incentive plans address is will only then will those things work. And that's, any questions on that? It's kind of an interesting theory, but and where it comes into real challenge is that when somebody says, I want to put a salesperson in place and I want to put them on 100% commission because I don't have the cash to pay them a salary, and then expect them to be motivated to sell. We'll talk about line of sight in a second, but that is one of the biggest mistakes I see business owners try to do, to solve a short-term problem with a long-term commission plan. We are talking about money. We are talking about motivation, so you kind of work into kind of this theory. If you want, I work for money. If you want loyalty, get a dog. How many of you feel like your employees are coming to you with their hands open saying, just pay me more and I'll do what you want? Well, unfortunately, that's the easiest thing to express, the reasons for their failure. And it's easier to throw money at them than maybe address some of these other issues. But let's talk about designing an incentive plan. Why on earth do you want to put a plan in place? Well, there's a half a dozen key reasons that incentive plans work once you get these other things in place. First off, if you are making a change, incentive plans help people accept change once they feel safe, secure, and belong. It aligns pay with business results. This is the most important reason to put in an incentive plan. We are faced with an issue of when to hire that next person, when to bring them on board. When can I afford them? Well, the answer is you can afford them as soon as they're paying for themselves. And that's one of the principles we'll cross in a minute. But an incentive plan by design is a variable cost. If they do something, the company makes more money and therefore they make more money. It's not an entitlement. That's one of the biggest downfalls of many incentive plans I see put in place. The same thing happens every pay period, so they work it into their lifestyle and it becomes an entitlement, whereas a true incentive plan varies every single pay period. Let me step back a second and clarify a term. Commissions, spiffs, spot bonuses, those type of things are all forms of variable pay. But what I want to talk about today is very specific to incentives versus those bonus programs. Now, commissions and skiffs are more akin to an incentive. An incentive plan says, if I do A, I will get B. If the employee sells 17 carrots and I pay them $1 per carrot, they will get $17. There's a clear cause and effect between the amount of compensation and the activity. The activity precedes the pay. A bonus is a reward, and it can work in the right setting. But it's important that when I'm talking about today's topic, I'm not talking about bonuses. Bonuses are subjective awards that are given to employees because they did something. They don't know what exactly they did. There wasn't a quid pro quo promise that I will pay you this if you do that. So they feel like, great, I got the bonus. Now what do I need to do it again? And they're left with some ambiguity. Now, quite frankly, ambiguity can be a positive thing if you're the one writing the check. But be aware that bonuses do not have as strong a cause and effect as do incentives. So here are the guiding principles for an incentive program. The first one is that it must result in improved business, greater sales, greater efficiency, and it has a positive calculated ROI. If you can't calculate an ROI, you're probably better off with a bonus plan, not an incentive plan. It's also very important, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that you reward both what happens and how it is achieved. There are many cases where very powerful incentive plans are put in place and they get the asked for, but the manner in which they are achieved destroys the reputation of the business. How many of you have been in a high-pressure situation, typically furniture stores are the worst about this, where they get paid a clear commission, but they may tackle each other or not listen to the customer, make the customer feel very pressured because how the results were achieved were incompatible with the company's purpose. The other principle is they have to be understandable and achievable. Understandable means you don't want to create an incentive plan that you have to get a professor of economics to discuss and communicate. They have to be fairly simple, and they have to be within the participants' line of sight. They can see what it is they're trying to achieve. Well, let's walk through those. The final and most important guiding principle is that they change. Now, that may sound contradictory to the line of sight. If I do A, I get B. It's very important that when you put in an incentive program, unless you're perfect, and there aren't very many people who are, that you know exactly what's going to happen. You know exactly what's happening in the marketplace, and you know exactly what's happening with technology. You have to put in a provision and clearly communicate that the plan will change. So let's talk about a design process. I enjoy using processes. By definition, a process is a documented method of doing something that achieves repeatable and scalable results. So I have a 10-step process that I've evolved into over the years to design an incentive plan. Number one, document why you're doing this. What are the business plan reasons for putting an incentive plan? Don't do it in a reactionary fashion to an employee coming to you and saying, I need more money. Sit down and go through the process. Who needs to be in the plan, and what behavior needs to be motivated, and how do we want that behavior to take place? Is this a short-term situation or a long-term situation? And I've used a lot of short-term incentive plans to affect rapid change. And so it can be between now and July 1st, I'm going to put an incentive plan for us to accomplish a certain objective. Fill in the blanks. Finally, if you're a strategic planner using SVL or other tools, you should tag this as a critical success factor. There's very few things that are going to impact your business greater than changing the way you pay your employees. Conduct a brief but encompassing feasibility assessment. How much money do you have? What are the cultural conditions in your company? What are the business conditions? Is it rapid change? Is it stagnant? Is there new competitors coming in who have a significant draw on the workforce? In general, how is the labor market? Do you have a shortage or a surplus of this talent? What is the pay levels? How do you benchmark the pay levels in the marketplace so that you determine your total cash compensation is appropriate? Can you administer the plan? Do you have the technology to plan? And how sound is your company? And you, of course, do that through a SWOT process. Are the employees ready? This is part of the feasibility. Do you have a brand new workforce? Do you have a workforce that's stagnant? What is their current initiative level? How well is their compensation competitiveness currently? Can you measure their performance? Can you document objectives? Do you have a situation in place and a process in place to do that? Are they mature in their jobs? And quite frankly, do they trust you? Because they're going to view, particularly if you're changing your compensation program from a fixed salary basis to some mix of incentive and base or all incentive, you've got a trust problem from the get-go. Going back to that pyramid with Maslow, when you start introducing change, people will go lower into the pyramid until they reestablish that level of comfort. So you have to over-communicate the trust and the reason. The next step in the program, though, is to develop a compensation strategy. Again, a mistake I often see is what I call wedding caking pay. Okay, we got a base salary. It's not getting me what I need. Let's add a layer of incentive on. Okay, let's add a layer of bonus on. Let's add a layer, add a layer, add a layer, and we don't have an overall picture of what we're trying to achieve. A total compensation strategy includes the 5 areas you see in the diamonds on the slide. Base pay, incentives, benefits, wealth accumulation, and career growth. If you don't have an overall compensation strategy, you're shooting randomly. But today I want to focus on 2 elements of that compensation strategy primarily, which is the cash portion, the incentive plus the base pay. Now the incentive can be 0, and it's 100%. I mean, the base pay can be 0, and it can be 100% incentive, or some mix thereof. So you have to decide what's the total amount this position is worth in the competitive marketplace so that you're not overpaying or underpaying. There's other factors that you can use, but you can kind of see these. You've got base salary, cost of living adjustments, merit increases, competency pay, spots or spiffs, short and long-term incentives. Each of those have a specific purpose. When you start talking about the mix between fixed pay and variable pay, regardless of how you do the variable pay, it's important to establish the ability of the employee to control the outcome. The greater degree of control of results they have, the higher percentage you can put at risk. Now, the interesting thing about being a business owner, and I presume most of you are, we have 100% control because guess what? 100% of our compensation is at risk. There's nobody following up with a salary if we fail. So that's the extreme. If you have someone, for example, a receptionist, and that receptionist is told, we're going to pay you $3 for every person you greet coming in the door, but you can't go out on the sidewalk and pull them in, they have no control whatsoever for the number of people who come in the door. So you don't want to put them on 100% volume incentive. Again, if you have any questions, please stop me. But this is a very, very important concept. Again, for cash reasons, for various reasons, our first impulse may be, I want to put a 100% commission plan in. If they can't control the results, their time, their tools, their methods, then they're going to be frustrated. The 6th step is actually the design process. So if you take back, we've understood our purpose, we understood who we want in the plan, what we want to achieve, our organization is ready, the employees are ready, we've got an overall compensation strategy. Step 6 is let's come in now and design the plan. I am a big proponent of getting the participants involved, because the more you involve them in the design process, the more they'll buy into the plan and move with it. If you surprise them at the end and you've hired intelligent, self-motivated people, they're going to question what you've done. So you need to determine who you want, if you want involvement, their level of involvement, clarify who has to approve this. This is not an abdication of responsibility. You guys just come up with whatever you want and I'll write the checks. That, of course, is a recipe for disaster. So if you continue to, if you set up the situation whereby they're involved in what you measure and when, then I think you get greater buy-in. Alicia, I think you had a question?
The conference has been unmuted.
For what?
Oh, thank you very much. With the employee involvement, so if you have different layers of management within your business, do you feel that you should just involve the direct report, the managers who the employees are reporting to, or both groups?
Alicia, that's a great question. And for those of you who may not have heard the
question,
question,
here, I didn't know I was going to have a choice. I've never done it before.
So then let's, I guess, look at
That's
that.
fine.
We have some individuals who are not muted. I'm going to go ahead and mute while Russell addresses the question. So stand by, please.
Okay.
The conference has been muted.
of my organization, who do I involve? The intermediate managers or the employees themselves? Some of my most successful incentive plans, I involve the actual employees who were in the plan without any other managers in the room. I then made it clear to that group that managers would be brought into the process and they would maybe have to clarify the recommendation, but after it was all said and done, senior management, or in this case the owners, had to approve the plan. But I find that you ask questions with the day-to-day participants. How do you do your job? What is important about your job? What are the priorities that you're facing? What would make you feel successful in performing your job? And you receive a tremendous amount of information. Then you'll see some of the other points in the process we'll talk about. You go back to that group and get their buy-in throughout the process. Then when you roll out the plan to the larger population, you've got ambassadors for the plan built in.
The conference has been unmuted.
Alicia, did that address your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
The conference has been muted.
Really useful to have the participants in the plan is defining what it is you're going to measure. What is important to the job? Is it for, and I'll show you some examples in a second, what are the key components of success in your job? They can be financial. We're going to make so much profit. Again, remember the line of sight. Is it improved productivity? Is it improved quality, timeliness? Is it improved teamwork? Once you select the factors you want to measure, you then establish standards. When you're establishing standards of success, you want to measure that which provides an incremental value to the company. So you don't start paying necessarily at the first dollar of productivity improvement, but after a certain hurdle, you may start paying incentives on it. That all depends on benchmark data you have for your job, how good are the standards, what your budget is, and then you need to focus on the time period to determine its a success, not just a spike. Then you weight the criteria, and as I mentioned earlier, you establish thresholds. Let me give you an example. How many of you ever, well, you can't, I wish we were in a room together, I could see you nod or doze off, but I worked a lot with designing incentive plans for commercial lenders, the guys that we go to and try to get a loan from. The interesting thing about bankers is they're salespeople. And in a good economy, the bank as a whole may want growth. In a tough economy, such as we're coming out of, they may want the lenders to focus on loan servicing and quality. So you see, for example, in the commercial lenders plan, we had profitability, growth in volume, portfolio quality, and servicing activities, 4 key elements we wanted to measure. In a growth economy, 50% was on growth, 20% on quality. In a tough economy, look how the plan was ratcheted back. 40% portfolio maintenance, and 10% growth. So if you felt like, in your experience, going to lenders over the last 3 years where they really didn't want to loan anything, they just kept asking for information, if you pulled back the curtain, you probably find out that's what they were getting paid for. I'll give you another example about volunteer firefighters. I worked for municipal government years ago, and in the state I was in, when a city annexed a community that had a volunteer firefighter, by law they had to provide firefighting services within 30 days. It's impossible to build a fire station in 30 days. So they would contract the existing volunteer firefighter and, in essence, have them provide that service. A true story that the city manager put in a plan that paid these volunteer firefighters on a per-fire basis. Guess what happened? A lot of fires got started. So you got to be careful what you're measuring, and is it important to what you're trying to achieve, which was fire safety, not firefighting. Next principle in the design is who's going to be in it. Do all the participants really need to participate? We'll talk about team incentives in a second, but just because they are in your company doesn't necessarily mean they all need to be on the same pay plan or incentive plan. It's important to design the plan for the people involved. Is it an individual plan? Is it a group plan? Is it a company-wide plan? All of these are appropriate responses depending on the purpose of your plan. If you want to put a team plan in, and most of us like to feel like we want teamwork, well, there are multiple different types of teams. Just think about a sequential team, like a relay team, where one person cannot run the other person's leg of the race, but they have to cooperate. An assembly line is the same type of thing. If my job is to put the pills in the bottle, and the next guy's job is to put the lid on the bottle, he can't do his job unless the bottle's full appropriately. Then there's contributory plans where everybody's on the team in a very defined role. Think surgery, think football, and they're not supposed to step out of their role or the team as a whole fails. Cooperative teams such as research and development or soccer, just use a sports thing, they all pretty much do the same things and contribute and cooperate for success. The worst reason to put a team plan in, however, unless that's the purpose, is to make sure everybody knows they're on the same team. Just because you're all wearing the same jersey doesn't mean you have to be on the same plan. The next step is determine the frequency of payout. There's short and long-term plans. Some plans pay immediately on performance. A lot of mystery shop plans are designed that way. A mystery shopper comes into your business, typically a retailer, and goes through a script, sees how the retail employee responds, and leaves. It's really fun to go back in and give that person a $50 gift card if they were successful. That's an immediate incentive. It can be on the next pay period. It can be monthly. It can be quarterly. Longer term, if you're in a seasonal business, let's say, for example, you're in the skiing business and you want to pay out at the end of the ski season, depending on how well the company did. That's a seasonal plan. Annually, multi-year for long-term objectives, or it could be ongoing. The principle here is as soon as the results are achieved, you pay as soon as possible. And so the timing of success determines the timing of payment, not your payroll cycle. You can do cash. That's typically what we're talking about. But non-cash incentives are extremely powerful. How many of you heard of Mary Kay and the pink Cadillac? Trips, trophies, prizes, time off. If you want to really get good at this, you do a workplace motivators or a behavioral motivator assessment and determine what type of things reward different people. If you have someone who is into learning, tuition reimbursement may be more valuable than the same amount of money in cash. But non-cash recognition incentives have a longer shelf life than cash does. When I first was studying how Mary Kay operated, it was very simple. The person who was running their program that I was speaking with said, if I gave you $50,000, are you going to knock on your neighbor's door and say, my boss just gave me $50,000? The answer is no. We tend to keep pay private. But if I park a Cadillac in my driveway, my neighbors know I got $50,000, $60,000 incentive. So there's a lot of long-term recognition and shelf life to non-cash. So my encouragement here is don't limit yourself to just paying cash. The next step is how are you going to, this is a little bit slow, I apologize. Let's test the plan. If you highlight anything that I've talked about today, highlight the word test. The reason I am absolutely emphatic about this point is run your plan in the back room before you communicate it to the employees. So how do you do that? There's a couple things you can do. You create your measurements, your thresholds, all the things we've just talked about, and then you run last year's data through the plan. And then you say, if there's a 20% increase in the measures we're looking at, what am I going to pay? If you don't have historical data, which is preferred, because you can what-if it, you run the plan in the background for a period of time, a month, 2 months, 3 months. The worst thing you can do is roll out a plan you can't afford, because then you have to backtrack. And backtracking will send people right down that motivational pyramid into, oh my gosh, I can't live indoors and feed my family again. That's the behavioral reaction you'll get. So you determine if you're going to get a positive return on investment from this incentive plan, and this is a huge piece, you can actually administer it. You can gather the data. You've set up the spreadsheets. You've tested the calculation. And you know you can do it from a get-it-done standpoint. Another alternative, and a little bit risky, but if you have a large enough organization, you can put a pilot in. That's public. It's visible. You got to put a lot of disclaimers in. So the best way is to do it in the background. But test your plan before you roll it out. Then you got to plan your communication. Again, this is an area I've seen many, many times where there's been a good deal of stumbling involved with incentive plans. You do all this work, hopefully it didn't shortcut anything, but then you just say, here it is, and you email. You're now on a commission plan. What does that mean? What's the game plan? How do I know where, actually I've skipped ahead a little bit, but before you start the communication, let's go back to step 8. Write it down. Create a unilateral plan document that has things like effective dates, purpose, participation, who's in, what are contingencies. Is there a waiting period before you enter the plan? If you transfer to another position, if you terminate. And oh, by the way, be sure and look at your state laws on that issue. Some states, particularly I'm aware of Virginia and Wisconsin, if you earn an incentive and leave before it's paid, it still has to be paid. That's not true in every state. So get some perspective on that from your state laws. But put down your criteria, any performance grid, your funding source, administrative. General provisions are things like, if you die, if you terminate, if you're disabled, if you do something that embarrasses the company, if there's any windfalls or shortfalls outside of your control. You put a general provision section in there. But finally, and again, in most places, this is the legal route to take. It's a unilateral plan, which means you do not ask the employees to sign a copy. Because if they sign a copy, in many states, in many jurisdictions, you've just crossed over into a bilateral contract that has to be agreed to if any changes are made. So then you got your communication transition plan. How are we going to move people to this plan? Who is it we're trying to put in the plan? What is the timing? What kind of training do they need? How am I going to communicate this? What is my strategy? Is it meetings? Is it handouts? Do I give them worksheets so they can pre-calculate how it's going to work? Do I have group meetings, one-on-one meetings? So plan your communication, which is why the documentation is so important. That gives you the script. And then finally, you implement the plan. So we're at step 9. You go ahead and roll it out through whatever communication strategy you've decided to adopt. Monitor what's going on. Communicate frequently. Look at what's going on. Provide feedback. Use the plan as a coaching tool. And then review what's going on. So you've designed this plan, you've communicated, you've rolled it out. After the first performance period, look very carefully if you're getting the results you want, if you're getting a return on those results, and is the behavior what you expected. I'll give you another example going back to banking. Many of you, some of you on the call may remember before ATMs existed. Well, when ATMs existed, we wanted in the banking business to move people into using ATMs instead of the tellers. So we paid the CSRs a spiff or a spot incentive on every ATM card they sold. Sounds good? Very simple, straightforward, easy to measure, easy to administer. The ROI was there. But there's an ability to link 3 accounts or 4 accounts to one card, which was in the best interest of the customer. What happened is some of our CSRs determined, customer service reps, determined that if I had a customer with 4 accounts, I could get $20 instead of $5. Guess what we found out? The behavior was not what we expected. People were doing things that were counter to the best interest of the company because they were counter to the best interest of the customer. So we changed it. We communicated why we were changing it. We had put in our plan documentation and communication that the plan was subject to change based on business conditions and operations. So in communicating the change, we communicated the reason for the change so we didn't appear to be capricious or cheap. Because, oh, you just don't want to pay me $20. No, we want to pay you $20. We want to pay you $100 if 20 customers come out with the card. So it's extremely important that once it's put in, you have a step to review and revise. And I'm going to say something I don't want to make it sound like I'm manipulative, but it's I think it's a strong statement early in the plan to make a change. So you don't plan to make a change, but look carefully and make the change earlier. That sets the expectation that, yes, this is variable pay. And it will vary not only based on my performance, which is primary, but things may change. You know, one of the problems we have with many union situations is they can't change the way the work is done if technology makes the work easier. Because of the union agreement, that person's job can't change. You don't want to create that situation with your incentive plan to where I can't change something because it will affect people's pay. So have the ability and exercise the right to change the plan. 10 core learnings that I've picked up over the decades I've been doing this. Your compensation plan has to be aligned with your culture and your business plan goals. And that's important. The cultural piece cannot be overlooked, particularly, regardless of the size of the organization. A company with 3 people or a company with 300,000 people needs to have a culture that the plan reinforces. Commit to doing this, particularly if you get employee involvement. If you decide down the road that you can't do it, you're better off not have started. But if you commit to going through the process, and as a parent it's not the right thing to do, then stop. But commit to at least going through the investigatory process. Link compensation and time changes to other business changes. If you know something's occurring on the horizon that will impact your business, wait to roll out the new compensation plan or time the compensation plan with that external change. For example, let's say you move geography, and that's going to be disruptive enough. Don't change their plan while you're disrupting the workplace. Wait till that's over. Or if it's important to put a short-term incentive in to make the move successful, then create an incentive plan around how quickly you make the move and come back up to 100%. So timing it with other business initiatives is extremely important. Integrate the compensation, the incentive, the base pay, with your other people processes. When you're hiring, this incentive plan ought to be part of the conversation. So you don't get into a hiring situation that doesn't involve a detailed compensation program. At the same time, when you go through a transfer or termination, you understand the impact on the pay. You need to establish a clear line of sight. And I've used that term a couple times, and it's really simple. The employee can understand that they can control their outcome, and therefore they are in control of their incentive program in terms of their performance. Line of sight means I can get from here to there, and I understand why I did it and what I need to do it again. Democratize the pay process, and what that means is not the political definition of Democrat versus Republican, but get people involved in the design, in the elements. What's important to measure? What are fair benchmarks? Here's our test results. Any ideas on how to communicate this to your peers? You might not need to involve everybody in the company, but get a representative sample of the people who are going to be impacted in the plan. If you have 8 salespeople, bring 2 of them in on any design changes. Those 2 then become advocates for and evangelists for your plan. Measure results. You pay on results. You can measure process, but only pay on results. In fact, one of the key principles in funding the plan is you don't pay out until you've got the money. I understand with Enron, one of the key drivers that brought Enron down, and maybe some of you are familiar with this, is that they had 4 sets of books. They had their public financials, they had their tax financials, they had their management financials, and then they created a whole series of financials to calculate their management incentive. And it did things like pay on future earning streams that hadn't been realized. So it was a Ponzi scheme, a house of cards. The money was not in the company before it was paid out. So an extremely important principle is to make sure that you understand when the results occur, when you can afford to pay it, so you're not writing checks you haven't been paid for yet. Accrue the incentives, but pay the incentives on cash. Refine, refine, and refine. Like I talked about earlier, set up a situation, look for situations to modify the plan. Let me give you an example there. Let's say, for example, you're looking at paying 13 cents on every bottle filled of aspirin, and you determine that the ROI of the plan could probably pay 15 cents instead of 13 cents. Roll the plan out at 13 cents. After it's proven itself, make a positive announcement and change it to 15 cents. So by putting in those planned refinings or responding to behavior that is good or bad, change your plan. Be selective about who you put in the plan. Again, I want everybody to participate in this incentive plan. And Fred, you're over here in the mail room, but we're going to pay you on sales results. And there aren't any sales results, and Fred gets frustrated and the mail doesn't get distributed. Finally, and the most important thing I've learned over the years, unfortunately or fortunately, people will do what you pay before they will do what you say. So again, that's another thing that if you really want to focus on the learning here, if you put in an incentive plan, they're going to do what you pay them to do. Because that is a stronger, tangible signal of what you really must want, even though you may have an idea of the month or a cultural thing that it overrides. So be careful to do what you want them to do. Jack Welch, business guru with General Electric, says if you pick the right people, give them the right opportunity to spread their wings, compensation as a carrier, you don't have to manage them. And I think the compensation as a carrier is a great metaphor for what you're trying to do here. It's not going to do their work, and it doesn't replace leadership, but it does replace the requirement of having to micromanage people. Extremely powerful tools. Any questions?
The conference has been unmuted.
Everyone is unmuted. If anyone has any questions for Russell, now would be the time.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any questions, of course, I think you can get in touch with me through the alternative board if you have any things you'd like to talk with. There's some upcoming seminars I wanted to just quickly bring your attention to. The one on the 30th on team evaluations, on March the 6th on social media. I'm looking forward to that one. And creating a business plan on the 15th. Rachel, do you know who the presenters are?
I apologize. Can you repeat that, please?
I didn't know if you knew who the presenters were for these next three.
Oh, sure. Let me just actually look up that really quick if you want to bear with me a moment.
Yeah, I'll put you on the spot. How about that?
Of course. Well, that's all right. That's how I
Well,
work.
while she's doing that, it's still unmuted if you have any questions. Any skeptics? Anybody says that this won't work?
I have a question.
Certainly.
On collective goals, so you talked about the different groups that you could do, whether it's individual or solo. And I have known of some colleagues who kind of reward their whole office, it's a medical office, based on a target of product sales for the month. And everybody gets a certain percent, whether they are the receptionist at the front desk, the nurse, or the medical assistant. So it's even across the board. What is your experience with the pros and or cons with those types of incentive programs?
I see that a lot, particularly in a small business. If we hit our sales goals this month, everybody's going to get a prize. And that's great, as long as you don't tie it necessarily to the volume and the quality of the sales. There needs to be that line of sight. If in a medical office, if I have to, and what was your scenario? They had to sell a certain amount of products?
Right. They had a goal, a group number to hit. So let's say it was $100,000 in product sales.
Yeah. I know a dentist office where they sell a lot of those water pick type teeth cleaners. And so the dental hygienists are the primary sales force. And the margin on them is very, very beneficial to the dentist office. And they said, we want to sell 50 of these water picks this month. And if we do, everybody gets $50. Well, you're wasting your money on everybody except the dental hygienist because they didn't do anything except maybe some peer pressure, some reminder, but they didn't affect the sale. So you're giving money to people who aren't impacting results and shortchanging the people who are impacting results.
Exactly.
Now, what I would yeah. And so what I recommend in a situation like that is that the individuals get their incentive, their spiffs, and if the overall team makes, then you have a team lunch or some recognition for the encouragement, for the reminding, that type of thing. So everybody has skin in the game, but it's a zero, it is a yes or no.
Okay.
So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, it does make sense. And, are you worried about, the main concern of this colleague was that she's worried about creating competition within the office if they had some people that were weighted more than others.
Well, and that's
and a negative competition, not a healthy competition.
Well, yeah, and that's why you have to watch the behaviors your plans are generating as well as the results they're generating. You remember, and there's a furniture store in this market that I won't mention. Warren Buffett owns it if you want to research it. But you walk in the door and you feel like you're being tackled and smothered by one person. And if you ask another person a question, the other one will come over and knock them out of the way. Well, they're on 100% commission, I will promise you. And that's creating a behavior that I don't want to go in their store. But competition, healthy, is the best thing you can have. And that's why I love that when we have a leaderboard or a scoreboard showing the results. They're public, they're transparent, and people do compete. And because you want to hire winners. So competition should be good, but you got to watch and make sure that the behavior is consistent with your values. So if there is any teamwork involved in selling, then some of the commission may be going into a teamwork pool as opposed to just one person. So there's a lot of ways to finesse that, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
And just to answer Russell's, Russell's previous question, the performance culture 2x2 team evaluations will be conducted by Dallas Romanowski. The person behind the brand on social media engagement will be conducted by myself, Rachel Moore. And creating a business plan will be conducted by Peter Mintz.
Yeah, one of the advantages you have is being part of or aware of the alternative board, and this is one of the great benefits to this organization. If you hire a coach who stands alone by themselves, they don't have access to 200 other experts like you have within the alternative board. Rachel Dallas and who was the third one, I'm sorry?
Peter Mint.
Peter, yeah. Those guys are great. They're a lot brighter than I'll ever be. So I highly encourage you to go to those series as well.
And I do encourage, as the slide depicts, if you want to go to thealternativeboard.com and /national-events. All of those are listed, and we update that as we add them onto the schedule. We usually have at least 1 or 2 webinars per month. And they are free and can be shared out to whomever on your team you'd like to view them as well. And then if just one last call for any questions for Russell pertaining to his designing incentives.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I came in late, so just administratively, are the slides available on the internet?
We are going to, we've recorded today, so we'll be sending out the webinar, so it'll not only include the slides, but also Russell's commentary and his narration for them, and as well as any questions being asked. So that'll be sent out to everyone on the call.
Yeah, also, Russell, there's a lot of talk about the book, Ownership Thinking. Your stuff seems to be very good, and so I'm just wondering, are you aware of that book, and can you give any comments on it relative to your approaches here?
I didn't catch the title.
Ownership Thinking.
Overship?
Ownership Thinking.
Ownership Thinking.
It's by a guy named Brad Hams. One of my members has read it and got very impressed by it. I'm intending to read it, but just wondering if you'd heard about it. Essentially, it's all about increasing engagement of staff into the company with an incentive plan as part of that strategy.
I haven't read the book, but I can speak to that philosophy.
Yeah.
When people feel like they can control their function, it creates engagement and ownership, and that research has been standing for 25 years. So by creating an ownership in their results and a return on their particular results through an incentive plan, it can work wonders. It is extremely powerful. It's also extremely powerful like fire and electricity if it's not done well.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think you made a good point when you had the graph that showed that the amount of variability needs to be matched by the amount of control that the employees had. That was very good.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Russell?
Well, thank you for attending today. Again, contact me or Tab if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you. Please stand by.